Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test Tech. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build the wing of the FT3D XL. Let's go and get our materials in order and we'll get started. So before we start the wings, we're going to make sure that we have all the pieces popped out that we need. Take your time popping out these pieces. Also, make sure that anything like your servo holes are already removed. Feel free to pause the video and make sure that you have all these components here. First, we're going to have our main spars and we're going to have our two side wings. It's also a really good idea to keep some scrap foam handy in case you need to smear any glue. Now that we have all our pieces popped out, I'm first going to start with my main spars. I'm going to use my Flite Test razor blade from our Crafty kit. Now a really good tip is to dull the very tip of your razor blade on a piece of concrete or coarse sandpaper. This is going to make it so it doesn't easily cut through the bottom piece of paper. Once we have that, we're going to go ahead and trace all the score lines that we have, making sure that we don't go through our bottom paper. Once we've cut through our score lines, we can go ahead and fold each piece 180 degrees and easily with our fingernails rock out the foam and remove that channel. Take your time doing this process because the cleaner of a channel that you open, the better everything's going to fold together. Again, we're going to do the other side. Just fold this over 180 degrees. And with our fingernails, we can just rock out the foam in one single piece. Again, we're going to do the other side. Once we've cut through our score lines, we can go ahead and fold each piece 180 degrees and easily with our fingernails rock out the foam and remove that channel. Now that we've cleared out our two channels of foam on each spar, let's go ahead and do a practice A-fold. An A-fold is where the side plates will sit above the bottom plate. To practice our A-fold, we're going to leave the side plates firmly against the table, and then we're going to carefully rotate up the bottom plate 90 degrees while pushing down firmly against the table. If you did everything right and your foam channels are cleared enough, you should easily be able to bend this up to 90 degrees without too much resistance. If you have any buildup of foam in your foam channels, make sure you remove that with the edge of a razor blade or even something like a credit card. We're going to try this on both sides and everything fits great. Now that we've practiced both of our A-folds, we're going to go along with our hot glue gun. And for this build, I strongly recommend using our bigger FT300 glue gun. The reason is because we're going to be running long glue joints. Also for my setting, I like to have it at medium or sometimes just below medium depending on what I'm working on. We're going to start about 1/4 inch from the edge and we're going to focus the majority of our glue right on the bottom of the side plate. Now that we have that bead done, we're just going to rotate it up 90 degrees and we're going to hold there for about 30 seconds. Now that we're done with the one side, let's go ahead and do the same process on the other. Again, I'm starting and stopping about 1/4 inch from the edge. This just keeps the glue from squeezing out and making a mess. Again, we're going to keep the side plate firmly against the table and we're going to rotate up 90 degrees. It's incredibly important to make sure that you use the table as your friend and you don't try to do this while holding in midair. The crisper and truer you can get these angles, the better your plane's going to go together. That's one spar down. Let's go and do the same process on the other side. Again, we're going to practice with our A-folds on both sides, making sure that we have nothing blocking our fold from easily happening. And that looks great. And I should have just enough glue to get these done. There's one bead. Same process on the other side. Focusing the glue on the bottom of the side plate is going to give you the strongest joint and make the least amount of mess. It's incredibly important to get these spars nice and true and 90 degrees from each other. The reason is because these are going to mount on your wings and the symmetrical airfoil is going to be based directly upon how the spar is shaped. Now that both of our spars are done, let's go ahead and put these to the side and we'll do our bevel cuts on our leading edge of our wing. Now you're going to notice that we already have an easy hinge right here, but this is actually not the leading edge. The leading edge is the center score cut. So if we go 2 in from each side of the score cuts, the 5th one or the 3rd one in the middle is going to be the one we want. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is the one. We're going to open this up 180 degrees. We're going to take our Flite Test knife and I'm going to use the detent. So I'm going to rotate this in one detent. This makes it really easy to be able to cut those bevel cuts because now what I can do is it'll automatically hold my blade at the right angle and I can let this back ridge right against my foam. That's really important whenever we're cutting bevel cuts, so we make sure that we don't cut through the center paper. So I'm just going to keep it on the one side. I have a nice new sharp razor blade. There's one. And we'll do it one more time. This time I'm gonna do it up against the table. This is probably how I'd recommend for you guys to do it. Now, whenever you do your bevel cuts, you wanna make sure that you can easily rotate this up past 90 degrees. If you have to fight it past 90 degrees, it's gonna put too much stress on the center line of your paper and possibly crack it. Don't worry if you accidentally cut through the facing paper while you're doing your bevel cuts. You can simply use some packing tape right over the hinge line and you'll be good to go. I've done one leading edge. Let's go ahead and put this aside. And we'll do the second leading edge. Again, I'm gonna count to the middle one. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. We've now confirmed there's our leading edge. We'll fold it 180 degrees. And again, we'll do the bevel cut just like we did before. Now that we've done both of our double bevels, we're gonna bring both pieces back in, and this time we're gonna face it score cut facing down. We're gonna line this up right in the middle where our leading edge, our trailing edge, and the center access hole is all lined up perfectly. Make sure you pull these nice and tight against each other, and then afterwards we can come back with a piece of 2-inch tape and tape the two halves together. Did my test fit. Easiest way to do this is just put your tape on one half of the paper, and I just leave this open, and I shingle the one side of the foam under the other. Doesn't matter which way you go. And just confirm that the leading edge, the center access hole, and the trailing edge are all perfect. And then we'll roll that forward with a lot of pressure. And this is where our little scrap piece of foam comes in great handy. Now we can come back, we can open up our two sides, roughly 90 degrees. I'm gonna put a nice healthy bead of glue right down the middle. I like to skip over our score cuts just so the glue doesn't interfere with our bevels. So notice I'm just skipping over, leaving about a 1/4 inch on each side. But other than that, leaving a nice healthy bead of glue. Bring that right down to the table. And we got exactly what we want to see. We have glue sticking right out the top, and we're gonna smear that over, just like a paintbrush. Notice I'm not forcing any glue intentionally down inside the score cuts. If a little bit gets down there, no problem at all. You can simply run over it with a razor blade and recut your score line. We're gonna hold this flat on the table and give it at least 2 minutes to fully dry. While our wing halves are drying, I'm gonna go to my hardware kit and I'm gonna remove one of our barbecue skewers. This barbecue skewer is simply gonna be meant to open up our score cuts just a little bit. In other words, we're gonna use the edge of our barbecue skewer to slightly crush down inside of our score cut, making them bend easy. Now don't drag this all the way to the bottom of the facing paper. Just through the top and about halfway down through the foam is all you need. Now that everything's dried, you're gonna see as we roll this up, we're not getting a lot of resistance at all as we make the wing have its shape. Now that our wing halves are glued together and we've also done a slight crush on all of our score lines, let's go ahead and glue our spars in. To glue our spars in, we're gonna make sure that we line up right in between the two score lines, and also, and most importantly, we're gonna line up a servo hole exactly over top of our servo recess. So I'm right between the score lines, I'm right on the edge here, I'm right in the middle here. That looks perfect. Now we don't need to take our glue all the way to the edge and have that go over on our score line and cause us not to be able to fold the wing over easy. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put the glue right down the middle. And that'll squeeze out, but it won't squeeze out all the way to the edge. Little rock back and forth. Just taking my time, making sure everything's exactly where I want it. You have a good 30 seconds. That looks wonderful. Let's go and do the other side. Quick test fit. You can see my servo hole lines up exactly where it needs to be, and I'm right between the score lines. And put the glue right down the middle. And that'll squeeze out, but it won't squeeze out all the way to the edge. Rocking motion's all you need. Again, I'm taking my time, making sure I'm exactly over the score lines. To give this wing plenty of strength, we're gonna go into our wooden hardware kit. There is a tremendous amount of wooden hardware inside. We have two main spar pieces. Those spar pieces are gonna be mounted right in the middle on both sides, just like you see here. So we'll do a quick test fit. We want to make sure it's nice and flush with the bottom, and it is. Nice healthy bead of glue right down the middle. And we'll flip it up. Little rocking motion's all we need. And then we'll do the other side. Get a little rocking motion. We're gonna give this a good 30 seconds to dry. So we're now ready to put the airfoil onto our wing, and this is one of the most critical steps of the whole entire build, specifically for your wing. Couple things you want to make sure. First of all, take your time, make sure everything fits the way you want to see it, and refit it and readjust as accordingly. Also, make sure you have plenty of glue for your hot glue gun and that your temperature is able to handle the amount of glue stream that you need. On the FT300, right in the middle will be just perfect for you. I'm going to rotate this wing sideways, but you don't need to do this for the build. I just want you to be able to see how the airfoil comes together. As we fold this over, you're going to notice the area where the spar is going to be flat up against the table, and the top area is going to come up along, and the score cuts are going to line exactly on the top of your spar. This is going to give you a perfect triangle. Make sure that you can do this all the way down the wing and that you have nothing resisting yourself as you do this. Once we fold this over, you should be able to kind of just lift up on the center section of your wing, and as you go from one end to the other, you should see that it's pretty much a perfect triangle. I like to kind of use my fingers as I fold this over, especially in the middle, and get the right angle. Do this 3 or 4 times and check the fold so when you finally put that glue down, it's going to be exactly where you want it. Now we're not going to put 3 stripes of glue down right off the bat. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and do the bottom seam. The second one we're going to do is going to be the very top seam, but we're not going to glue it to the spar. Now once again, it's incredibly important at this step that you do not put glue down on your double bevel. We're going to do that in a later step. This is all about establishing the proper angle of where the score cut meets the spar. So now that we're happy with that, I got plenty of glue in my hot glue gun. I'm going to go right down the seam that's against the spar that's already glued down. I'm going to go right on top of the spar and all the way. And now I'm going to quickly but carefully get my line etched right there. I'm gonna keep that hand over there. I'm gonna keep it there, and I'm gonna make sure it's in the middle. There's one. And notice I'm just going back and forth, making sure it's exactly where I want it to be. All right, that looks really good. I'm gonna give this about a minute to fully dry, making sure we lock in that angle. Now you're gonna see that when we open this up, everything is nice and solid, and we can now do the same process on this seam right here. So now I'm going to press the glue in. I'm not going to leave a big amount of glue excess. I'm only pushing it right inside that seam as I go down the edge. Now we can lift this up. We're going to go around, and I'm just pulling back ever so carefully, making sure that the very edge of the score cut right here is lining up with the edge of the spar. You don't have to move it around like I did on video. I just want you to get a really good angle. Notice I'm going back and forth and back and forth. Looking good. All right, that looks really good. I'm gonna give this about a minute to fully dry, making sure we lock in that angle. And after about 30 seconds, you notice now that we've locked in this angle too. To establish the angle from the spar to the trailing edge of both sides of our wings, we're gonna use some scrap foam, and we're simply gonna go ahead and establish the angle by placing some scrap foam right under the trailing edge. Now it's important that you don't push this too far, just about a 1/4 inch is all you need. And that's gonna be roughly the angle that we're gonna wanna see for the 2 halves to meet in the middle. So I got my scrap pieces of foam left over from my wing kit. Just gonna lay that right in there, between a 1/4 and a 1/2 inch in. Yep. And I'll just go ahead and rotate this for you. Once we have that established, we're gonna press a nice bead of glue right on the bottom. I'm just gonna rotate that right back on the table here, about a 1/2 inch in. And we're just gonna push down firmly and let that dry. Give this a good minute to fully let this dry before we move on to your next step. Same process on the other side. We're not gonna put it on the edge of the ailerons. We're gonna put it on the edge of the aileron hinge line. Again, we're gonna go about a 1/2 inch in. There we go. And again, we're making sure that this line here is gonna be firmly against the table. Once we're happy with that, Press a nice bead of glue right down in there. And then we're just simply going to use our fingers and make sure that the area that's going over the spar is flat up against the table. I'm going to go ahead and leave these spacers here. I'm just going to do a practice fold. And if we did everything right, we should see where the hinge line is darn near right over top, just like that. Because these pieces are the exact same from each other, this will guarantee that you have a nice symmetrical shape. So make sure that this area is flush and this area goes down your hinge line. All right, time to make sure we have plenty of hot glue for our hot glue gun, because our next step is going to be pretty critical. We're going to put a bead of glue right down our double bevel and on the top of both of our spars. While we're doing this, we're also going to make sure that our little shims that we have are still in place. This will just help us with the angles. All right, I got my extra hot glue gun right down the middle. And then right over top of the spar. One more stripe. And now we're going to fold this over. I like to kind of put a lot of pressure because I can always relax this as I roll this over. I'm just going to check on both sides of my spars, make sure that the very first one's lining up. And now I'm going to go ahead and open up my hand as far as possible to give it nice even pressure. If you have a friend that's helping you build, this is a good time to call on them to come in and give you a hand. I'm not too worried about the trailing edge at all. All I'm thinking about is making sure my spar area is pressed down right over those score cuts. All right, so now that the glue is firmly dried, you're gonna notice that our back is open, and that is absolutely fine. But you're gonna see, as I move these together, right over that hinge line, it's gonna make a perfect symmetrical airfoil, and that's exactly what we want. So make sure you have plenty of hot glue, and this time, I'll just try to go ahead and do it in reverse. You can do this pointing towards you. To make this final glue joint, I'm just gonna use my scrap foam. I'm gonna kind of prop this up, and that keeps us from accidentally making a flat wing on the very top. And now you can see as I go in here and I look from the side and I line up the hinge line perfectly, it's symmetrical and it's symmetrical again. There's no need to do both sides at the same time. So first I'm gonna do this side, second I'm gonna do the other side. I'm placing my glue about 1/8 inch in from the hinge line. Don't worry if you accidentally glue the hinge line shut, you can easily cut it back open later. I'm gonna go all the way to the center right there. And now I can get that one side centered up right there. The other side centered up. And we're gonna let that sit for about a minute. All right, there's the one half. You can see it's nice and symmetrical. Don't lose any sleep if it's off just a little bit. I promise you the plane's gonna fly fantastic. Let's go and do the other side now, the same process. Again, I'm just kind of moving my little scrap piece of foam shim right where it needs to go. It's gonna be a little bit harder to open up the center line, so I'll just work from the outer tip to the center. About 1/8 inch in. Plenty of hot glue right here. Again, I'm just concentrating on making sure my ends are symmetrical. I'll lock that down, and the center looks great. Got a little bit of extra hot glue right down that hinge line, but don't worry, we can cut that out later. And we're gonna press and hold for another minute. Now that our main wing is done, we're gonna put our attention towards the ailerons and most importantly, the servos and the hookup of both of them. For this, we're gonna be using our FT17G servos. It's really important that you center these servos before moving on to bending your push rods, or your push rods may not be perfect. So we'll go ahead and install our servos. I'm gonna center them up really quick. For this, we want to make sure that we install the largest control arm to get the most throw possible for our FT3D. If you're a beginner, it's really easy to move the push rods in closer to the servo screw. That's going to give you less deflection. This is our servo centering tool that comes with our crafty kit. And I'm just going to power on the input side with one single cell. We'll go to the middle. And that looks perfect. Make sure when you're centering servos that you're not applying too much voltage, like say a 2-cell battery, because if you do so, it's not only going to destroy your servo centering tool, but it'll also most likely destroy your servos as well. I like to keep my servo centering tool handy because anytime I'm bending my push rods, if I accidentally bend something, I can always recenter it at any time. If you haven't done so already, we're just going to cut the tape out right in the center. Just like to fold it down like that. There we go. And I'm going to carefully just push the push rod wire all the way through. If you want to put your extension on now, that's absolutely fine. You can always do it later as well. It's really important not to glue your servo in until we have everything adjusted just the way we like it, and you'll see why that is in a second. When we're installing our servos, make sure that your control arm points towards the wingtip. Don't bother gluing in your servos at this time. We're going to be moving these servos back and forth as we put the push rods inside. Next, let's go ahead and put our attention towards the control horns. Now, if accidentally any glue squeezed out over your hinge line, this would be a good time to very carefully cut that loose. If everything looks good, you should be able to very delicately fold over your aileron 180 degrees, and from that point on, we can cut our bevel cut on the aileron side. Once we make sure that we can move the aileron in both directions without any binding, in other words, we want to make sure that this bevel cut is as close as possible to the paper right in between the hinge line and the wing. Once we're happy with that, we can take a scrap piece of foam and we can do a hot glue reinforcement hinge. To do this, all we simply need to do is lay a thin ribbon of glue right over top of the facing paper and the foam board. Now we're not going to let that sit there. We're going to come right back with our scrap piece of foam and we're going to press that into the foam and the facing paper. Do 3 or 4 swipes with this until all the extra glue is removed, and make sure that there's no extra buildup on the facing paper. Too much buildup will give you the same problem as too much foam close to the hinge line. Let's do the same process now on the other side. Located in our hardware bag is going to be our control horns. Go ahead and pop 2 of those out. And keep in mind specifically with the maker foam that the soot from that can kind of track on the maker foam. So it's always a nice idea to be able to handle this with clean hands so you don't get too much extra soot. While we're getting our control horns ready, we're also going to pull out one of our pushrod wires. Now we gave you plenty of extra pushrod material, so don't worry if anything happens you need to rebend it, you're going to be just fine. But first, we're going to go ahead and do our Z-bend on the very end of our pushrod. To do a Z-bend, we're first going to grip this about 1 centimeter in, and with a strong pair of pliers, we're going to rotate 90 degrees. Next, we're going to go down about 3 millimeters, and we're going to bend it 90 degrees the opposite way. This is what we call a modified Z-bend. To take a modified Z-bend that you can roll into the control horn and turn into a typical Z-bend, all we simply need to do is grip our modified Z-bend and slowly rotate it 90 degrees. If you do all this, you're going to get a very nice, simple Z-bend. Now keep in mind, on our store, we sell Z-bend pliers, so if you don't want to do all this mess, you can easily pick up a pair of Z-bend pliers. It's as simple as reaching down, grabbing it, and squeezing. Now depending on what kind of flying you want to do, you're either going to use the outermost hole or the middle hole. I would strongly recommend not using the closest hole to the hinge line. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and go to the middle hole because I want as much throw as I can get. A simple rotation will allow the push rod to push right through the control horn. I'm going to blow off all my soot. I'm going to press this right down in the control slot. The easiest way to find center on your aileron and get both ailerons to match exactly is to push down where your spar is. And with a scrap piece of foam, you should be able to chalk this up. It may take 1 or 2 pieces of foam until this is nice and level. Looks like I need 1 more scrap piece. You notice the 2 scrap pieces of foam is pretty much nice and neutral here. We don't want our aileron to be drooped down or to be bent up, which is reflex. Now that we have everything chalked up just the way we want it, I'm going to use my nail and I'm going to put it on the edge of the hole closest to the hinge line. This is going to give me room to let my push rod bend as a radius. Once I made that mark, I can take my push rod and I can bend it. There we go. I'm just going to pop it out of the wing now. Once again, do our modified Z-bend. Now the reason I have everything chalked up and not glued in as of yet is because I have a little bit of wiggle room on everything from the servo to the control horn. It's really important that our control horn holes line up directly over top of our hinge line. So that means we can actually move our servo back and forth maybe a couple millimeters and our control horn maybe a couple millimeters to be able to get that lined up perfectly. If at any point you move your servo, you can easily recenter it. Now that I have my servo in place, I'm going to press this down one last time, just make sure I'm happy with it. Everything looks good, and now I can go back and I can lock everything in. I'm first going to start with my servo, Lift that up just ever so slightly. Fill both sides of the cavity with glue, and then press that down in. Take a little scrap piece of foam, take any extra hot glue, and press it into place. And now I can lift up my control horn. I'll fill the cavity with glue. Just one simple stripe is all you need. And I'll press that down in place as well. If you want to do a little extra reinforcement, a small bead of glue on both sides of the control horn will not hurt you. At any point, if you need to make any adjustments, you have about 30 seconds to be able to do so. At that point, let everything sit and lock it nice and tight. All right, we've done one side. Let's go ahead and do the same process now on the other side. Same exact process on the other side. We're going to use the rest of the pushrod material that we cut off on the one side, and that way we have extra for either future builds or if we need to make other adjustments. So again, we're reaching down 1 centimeter. After we make our first 90-degree bend, we're going to go down about 3 millimeters, do our second 90-degree bend. That gives us our modified Z bend. Now we can grab that, rotate 90 degrees, and there we have it. Going to go to the center hole here, and I'm just going to carefully press this down into place right over my aileron. And with my thumbnail, I'm going to mark on the edge of the hole just closest to the hinge line. That's going to give us room for our radius. There we go. And make sure we have everything nice and 90, no binding. We'll bend 90 degrees up. Grab it about 3 millimeters, 90 degrees again. And once we have our pushrod bent, we can snake it through the bottom, go into the outermost hole for the most throw. Again, if this is your very first airback model, you may want to go, a couple holes in, and you can always change that simply by removing your servo arm later. When you remove your servo arm, you have the ability to move both your control horn and your servo arm because the pushrod can be completely removed. And we have our double shim here. I always like to just check, make sure everything looks nice and neutral, and it does. Press that in, holes are right over the control horn, everything looks great. Let's go and lock it down with some glue. There we go. All right, friends, at this point, our wing is now done. Now you may notice that our wingtips are not installed yet, and that's for a good reason. If you want to do any painting, you want to do any wiring, like maybe your lights, or if you just don't want to dent them up before the final assembly, we will do that in our very last video. Now, if you're building along with me in this video, make sure you click on the next video in the playlist, which is going to be the FT3D fuselage. We'll see you there.